Hello and welcome to this course, How to Lead Virtual Teams. My name is Doug Gray, and I'm not sure, today's March 18th, I'm not sure if St. Patrick's Day even happened yesterday anywhere in the world. As you all know, the coronavirus has forced all of us to use virtual tools, and teams are critical as we continue to do our work together. To be clear, there's a bunch of different perspectives on this. One is that we've had virtual teams as long as we've had recorded history. We've always had a fiat from a king or some leader that was distributed to some dislocated or remote team, and then they did or didn't do that. But I think we've got a compelling argument for a lot of more significant changes. In fact, okay, so this last talk was about knowledge sharing, and now we're going to talk about motivation. Arguably the most important question in psychology. Why do people do what they do? And the factors that influence us are sometimes not well known. So I'm going to give you a couple of models that explain motivation and invite you to think about ways to nudge behavior using software. And then also a model for coaching that's globally validated, and you'll see more about that in a second. I like this image of a mountaineer. I used to be a mountaineer, and I used to do multi-day adventure races that were on CBS Sports. And the reason I like it is because it's not really clear what motivates mountaineers. There's old and bold, but very few old, bold mountaineers. Why is it that we do the things we do? So a guy at Harvard, David McClelland, determined that there were three big buckets. Some of us, and it might be roughly a third, need achievement. We need to feel a sense that we need to succeed in some manner. Another third of us might need affiliation. We might need to know that we've got social groups that reinforce our strengths. And a third group, I guess I should go over here, would be motivated by power, the need to influence other people. Now, it's not clear that is always the case. It could be that there are other motivators, for instance, creativity, autonomy. And it could be that sometimes those three don't appear to be obvious in George, just to pick a name, or Fred, who sometimes you think are incapable of contributing to the team. I invite you to ask people, how do you measure success? And commonly people, I do this in a triangle, I've been using this image for decades, will say, well, I measure success by task. If I get it done, it's a success. I don't care how many casualties there were along the road. As long as we won the race, met that objective, it was a success. Others will say, no, it's all about relationships. The extent to which we include others in this and we have a fun time, a great time, it's emotionally positive, that's a measure of our success. And the third group will say, nah, it's all about process. Success is measured by our capacity to comply with whatever the legal or ethical requirements are. Well, if it's a triangle or these Venn diagrams, and you're in one of these corners, but you need to go to this corner, that's your work. That's the thing that you need to be doing ahead. So now that you've assessed it, you've articulated it, the question becomes, how do you reward desired behaviors? Behavioral nudges is kind of a nerdy term that business psychologists like me use. And sometimes tools are really helpful. So I'm fond of this one. 15.5 is an example that looks at what are the objectives that are important in your virtual teams, and then what are the key results that help you get to those places. Another example is AdFit. So let me explain AdFit and invite you to use it. All right, and this is worth writing down if you haven't been taking notes, or I guess doing a screenshot or printing out this slide. A and the D stand for assessing and defining a meaningful outcome. So I want always to assess your strengths. I want to assess the strengths of the people on my teams. If I focused on their weaknesses, I'd be a different kind of manager, and I wouldn't recommend that. So please focus on people's signature strengths is a term that's been validated globally with some 40 million assessments now. And a free assessment is at this link, viacharacter.org. I invite you to look there. Mindset is to what extent are you willing to change? If you've got a fixed mindset to something, say 0 to 60%, you're not likely to change. You're not likely to be as coachable as somebody who's got a higher percentage, say 61% or more. That's called a growth mindset. Carol Dweck is one of the most prolific researchers there. There's a lot of free stuff at my site, action-learning.com. There's free courses, there's assessments. The point, let's imagine you know 6 or 10 strengths for each of the people on your team. Write them down. I keep file folders. On all of my clients, I use digital with the same heading as my physical. And you might say, Doug, why are you leading this thing on virtual leadership when you still write stuff down? The short answer is I retain more knowledge when I write it down. We know that to be true. And I can retrieve my notes quickly. And I can't always retrieve my notes because I can't always remember where to retrieve them digitally. The headings are the same, so there's no intellectual confusion there. I invite you to assess your strengths of everybody on your team and create a file folder for each of them, both digitally on a secure link and physically, so that you've got an ongoing way to maximize their productivity. Focusing on their strengths. We're not looking at performance weaknesses here. That old notion that gaps exist and Doug needs to go from here to there is silly. There's skill competency, to be clear, and there's skill development, and I'll address some of that in a second. But assessing our strengths means that we're going to focus on the things that Doug's good at rather than all those gaps. Then define a meaningful outcome or some objective. Typically, they're in one of those two buckets I already shared with you. It's a performance outcome or behavioral outcome. If you need a list, let me know. I'll send you the list. Once we have that assessment and we've assessed their strengths, and once we've defined that meaningful outcome, I use those in every call, every session with my clients and with the people that I work with. And typically, I'll ask these 3 questions. What do you want to focus on today? Pretty broad, right? It's an opening question that invites somebody to present some issue. To be clear, 3 minutes later, they might get to a deeper issue. But on a virtual team, it's a great way to get on board. So in this program, I gave you a goofy little slide that was sort of humorous about the evolution and that something went wrong. I used visuals, images, to sort of get you thinking about ways that you might lead your virtual team. When you're coaching, after asking what do you want to focus on, then I'll ask, have you considered this interaction, this intervention? Intervention is just a term that psychologists use for some validated process. It's something that we know works. And there's books of these. There's countless resources. I think more and more people are tasked with doing their own professional development. Self-coaching or coaching with peers is a thing, and it will always be a thing. I've been delighted with the hunger and aspirational goals and objectives I've seen from many people with a growth mindset who want to develop and accelerate their careers. That's what you want to foster. That's called motivating desired behaviors. At the end of each of those sessions, it could be 5 minutes in length, it could be 30 minutes, it could be an hour. I'll always ask, what are you taking away from today's session that you will do next? And the reason I do so is it's not about Doug doing the work for somebody else. Managers don't do the work. Managers maximize the productivity of others. They need to be doing the work. So I validated this globally, wrote it in a dissertation, Riveting. The title is Positive Psychology Coaching Protocols, Creating Competitive Advantage for Leader Development. If you want to go to sleep, you can find it on ProQuest. Try this model. It works really easily. Just start with assessing somebody's strengths, defining a meaningful outcome for them and for you. You're the virtual leader after all. And then asking in each session, what do you want to focus on today? Have you considered this intervention, activity, interaction? What are you taking away? Here are more specific examples of way to motivate a team. Apologize, part of this is cut off. But start with a team charter. It's simply a list of where are we going and how we're going to get there. We've got the outcomes at the top. Some people use GRIPI, G-R-P-I, where are goals, roles, process, and interventions. But you got to write them. And it could be a shared activity. It could be one of the first things you do to develop virtual trust. And then have everybody sign the thing, date the thing. And that becomes a charter that you post on the wall or you reference in the beginning of a meeting. Secondly, if you are aware through an assessment or something of people's needs for power and affiliation and achievement, you can plot those. You can put them on some visual demonstration of the motivators in your team. They're always going to overlap, and they're going to overlap also between people. So if you and I both have a need for, achievement, we're going to have some conflict because we've got similar needs. That's okay. In fact, I want to create tension in my virtual teams. I don't want to hire people who look like Doug. That'd be silly. I want to hire people who look and act and have different skills. Why? So we foster autonomy and creativity, innovation. Third point, I want to reinforce whatever milestones are critically important. We've got so many tools available. I've mentioned Zoom and Skype. FaceTime is a way in which you can communicate with your loved ones wherever they travel. Why not? WebEx is everywhere. GoToMeeting cameras. Oftentimes people don't think about this, but a non-contingent reward is something you occasionally do because it's the right thing to do. This week, as the federal government's trying to figure out how to respond to the virus, state and local governments are figuring out how to respond to the virus, small businesses are closing, a non-contingent random reward could be something like a letter, handwritten and mailed, or a gift, a physical gift that you might hand deliver with the permission of somebody to a client, to a colleague. It could be that we use non-contingent random rewards often, and we use them when we're in crisis. It's a way to motivate desired behaviors. I don't think we're doing enough of this. I personally am not doing enough of this in the last couple of weeks. I tend to go in my little, when we're frightened, we all do this. We go into our little tunnels or our turtle shells, and we don't get out and interact because we're not able to go to the gym or the office or the restaurant and bar and have a conversation with somebody, as we have been accustomed to and as we expect we'll be able to. So that means the virtual teams become even more important. The tools are there, most are free, and I invite you to just invite people to a pop-up meeting, a pop-up virtual session, and then thank them for doing so. So that's practice tool number 5, motivation. Number 6 is all about leadership competencies.